Have you ever wondered what would happen if you stood up to the most powerful person in your company? I did exactly that. 3 months ago, I was escorted out of the building by security, my personal belongings in a cardboard box, after I challenged our CEO about a decision that would have cost thousands of jobs. I thought my career was over. But last week, I walked back into that same building, not as an employee, but as a consultant hired by the board of directors. The same board that had rubber-stamped my firing. The same board that now desperately needed my help. Stay with me, because what happened in between isn't just my story. It might be the playbook you need when corporate politics turns your career upside down. Welcome to Dismissal Diaries, where we share real stories of workplace terminations that led to unexpected triumphs. Before I dive into how I went from disgraced former employee to board consultant in just 90 days, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories that will change how you think about career setbacks. Hit that notification bell, because trust me, you'll want to know when we post our next video about turning professional disasters into opportunities. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was sitting in our company's sleek conference room on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. The view of Central Park was stunning that day, but nobody was looking out the windows. All eyes were on our CEO, Richard Harmon, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had earned him the nickname, the Harvester, among the staff. The quarterly numbers were in, and they weren't great. Our stock had dropped 17% in the last quarter, and shareholders were getting nervous. Richard stood at the head of the table, his custom Italian suit unable to hide the tension in his shoulders. "We need to cut costs," he announced, his voice filling the room with a cold certainty. "I've decided we're going to outsource our entire customer service department and half of our development team to overseas contractors. It will save us approximately $40 million annually." I felt my stomach drop. I'd been with Axiom Technologies for 8 years at that point. I started as a project manager and had worked my way up to director of operations. I knew every department inside and out, and I knew exactly what Richard's plan would mean. 3,000 people would lose their jobs. 3,000 people with families, mortgages, and children in college. But it wasn't just the human cost that bothered me. It was the short-sightedness of the decision. Our customer service team had the highest satisfaction rating in the industry. Our developers had created proprietary systems that gave us an edge over our competitors. Outsourcing would save money in the short term, but the long-term damage to our company would be catastrophic. I looked around the table. 12 executives, all staring at their notepads, nobody making eye contact. They were afraid. Richard wasn't known for his tolerance of dissent. Challenging him had ended careers before mine. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the memory of working alongside many of those customer service reps during a product launch that nearly failed until their round-the-clock efforts saved it. Maybe it was knowing that this decision wasn't being made because it was necessary for the company's survival, but because it would look good on the next quarterly report and boost Richard's bonus. I cleared my throat. I don't think that's the right approach. The silence in the room deepened. Richard's eyes narrowed as they locked onto mine. "Excuse me?" His voice was soft, which was always more dangerous than when he shouted. I could have backed down. I should have backed down. But instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up a presentation I'd been working on for weeks, an alternative cost-cutting strategy that would preserve jobs while actually improving our long-term outlook. I've been analyzing our operational inefficiencies, and I've identified ways we can reduce costs without layoffs. In fact, my projections show we could save $53 million annually within 18 months, while actually improving our product quality and customer satisfaction. Richard's face flushed red. "You prepared this without my knowledge?" "I did," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. because I knew this conversation was coming, and I wanted to present a viable alternative. What happened next still feels like a blur. Richard dismissed my presentation without even looking at it. He accused me of undermining his authority. When I persisted, pointing out specific data that supported my plan, he cut me off. "This decision has already been made," he said. "The board has approved it." That's when I made the fatal mistake. I looked him in the eye and said, "Did they approve it because it's the right thing for the company, or because no one had the courage to show them an alternative?" The room went dead silent. I could feel the stares of my colleagues, some horrified, some almost admiring, all of them certain about what was coming next. Richard's voice was ice cold when he spoke. "Lisa, please escort Mr. Davis to HR. His employment is terminated, effective immediately." Lisa, our chief legal officer, couldn't meet my eyes as she stood up. I closed my laptop, picked up my coffee mug, and followed her out of the room with as much dignity as I could muster. As the door closed behind us, I heard Richard continuing the meeting as if nothing had happened. Within an hour, I had signed severance paper that included a non-disclosure agreement, handed over my company phone and laptop, and was being escorted to the elevator by a security guard, my personal belongings in a cardboard box. As I stood on the sidewalk outside the building that had been my professional home for 8 years, reality hit me hard. I was 42 years old, suddenly unemployed, with a mortgage, a daughter in her second year at NYU, and a reputation that would now include fired for insubordination. My hands were shaking as I hailed a cab. The first week was the hardest. I didn't tell my wife the full story at first, just that there had been a disagreement about strategy. I spent my days sending out resumes and reaching out to contacts in my network, but word travels fast in our industry. Several promising leads suddenly went cold once they spoke to someone at Axiom. It was during the second week that the first strange thing happened. I received a text message from Priya Kapoor, our chief financial officer at Axiom, or rather, their chief financial officer. It was brief. "Can we meet?" "Somewhere private." I suggested a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from our midtown office. When Priya arrived, she looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if worried about being followed. "What you did was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," she said, after ordering a chai latte. "But your numbers were right." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I ran the figures in your presentation. I had to reconstruct it from memory, but your projections checked out. You would have saved the company more money than Richard's outsourcing plan, and with far less disruption." I felt a bittersweet validation. "Not that it matters now." Priya leaned forward. "It might. The board doesn't know the full story. Richard told them you became belligerent and threatened him." I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's absurd. There were 12 people in that room. They all know what happened." Priya gave me a look that conveyed volumes about corporate politics. "And how many of them do you think will contradict the CEO?" She was right, of course. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct in corporate America. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Priya hesitated before answering. "Because the outsourcing isn't going well. The transition is a mess. Customer complaints have increased by 68% in just 10 days. 3 major clients have already threatened to cancel their contracts, and the development team in Bangalore is struggling to understand our architecture." "I'm not surprised," I said. "But again, what does this have to do with me?" "I think the board needs to know there was a viable alternative. One that's still viable, by the way. We could reverse course." I laughed without humor. "And you think they'll listen to me? The disgruntled ex-employee? They might listen to the data," she said. "Especially when their stock drops another 15%, which my projections show will happen when our next quarterly results come out." She slid a flash drive across the table. "Your presentation, plus some additional data I've compiled. Use it however you see fit." Before I could ask any more questions, she stood up. "I was never here. We never had this conversation." And with that, she was gone, leaving me staring at a small black flash drive that potentially contained enough information to vindicate me. Or get Priya fired too. I spent the next few days debating what to do with the information. Part of me wanted to move on, to focus on finding a new job and putting Axiom behind me. But another part couldn't let go of the 3,000 people whose livelihoods were at stake. My decision was made for me when I received a LinkedIn message from Eleanor Blackwell, one of Axiom's board members. She was also the CEO of a healthcare company and had a reputation for being sharper and more ethically grounded than many of her peers in corporate leadership. "I'd like to discuss your departure from Axiom," her message read. "I believe there may be more to the story than I've been told. We met for dinner at a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village. Eleanor didn't waste time with pleasantries. Richard says you were insubordinate and had no viable alternative to his cost-cutting measures. Several executives who were in the room have corroborated his version of events." She studied my face carefully. "But something doesn't add up. Your performance reviews have been stellar for 8 years. You were on the shortlist for a C-suite position." I took a deep breath. I was insubordinate in the sense that I challenged a decision that had apparently already been made. But I did have an alternative plan, a better one. "Show me," she said simply. I had brought my laptop and the flash drive Priya had given me. For the next hour, I walked Eleanor through my original presentation, supplemented by Priya's additional data that showed the initial negative impacts of the outsourcing. Eleanor asked sharp, insightful questions. She understood the nuances of our business model and quickly grasped the advantages of my approach. When I finished, she sat back and was quiet for a long moment. "This is significantly more comprehensive than what Richard presented to the board." "I'm not surprised," I said. "Why didn't you come to the board directly with this?" "That's not how the chain of command works," I replied. "And honestly, would you have taken a meeting with a director of operations who wanted to contradict the CEO?" She acknowledged my point with a slight tilt of her head. "Probably not. But I'm taking a meeting with you now." "Only because the outsourcing is already proving to be a disaster," I pointed out. "True," she conceded, "but it might not be too late to change course." She closed my laptop and handed it back to me. "I need to discuss this with some of the other board members, discreetly." I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks after that dinner. I continued my job search without much success. Richard had more friends in the industry than I had realized, and doors that should have been open to someone with my experience remained firmly closed. Then on a Tuesday morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Davis," a formal voice said when I answered. "This is Martin Chen, chairman of the board at Axiom Technologies. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and several board members. Would tomorrow at 10 a.m. be convenient?" I was so surprised I almost asked if this was a joke. Instead, I agreed to the meeting, my mind racing with possibilities. Were they going to threaten legal action for my conversation with Eleanor? Had Priya been discovered as my source? The next day, I found myself back in the Axiom building, being issued a visitor's badge by the same security guard who had escorted me out 3 weeks earlier. He had the good grace to look embarrassed. I was shown to a conference room, not the main boardroom, but a smaller meeting room on the 41st floor. Inside were Eleanor Blackwell, Martin Chen, and 3 other board members. Richard was conspicuously absent. Martin got straight to the point. "Ms. Blackwell has shared your presentation with us. We've had our financial team verify your projections independently. They hold up." I nodded, unsure where this was going. "What you may not know," Eleanor added, "is that customer satisfaction has dropped 38% since the outsourcing began. We've lost 2 major clients already. Our stock has fallen another 7%. Martin leaned forward. We've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. We're seriously considering reversing the outsourcing decision. I felt a surge of hope for the employees who might get their jobs back, followed immediately by confusion about my role in this. I appreciate you telling me this, but I'm not sure why I'm here. The board members exchanged glances. Then Martin spoke again. We'd like to hire you as a consultant to oversee the transition back to our original operational structure, assuming the board votes to reverse course. I was stunned. You want me to come back? After I was fired? Eleanor smiled for the first time. You were right when you said we wouldn't have taken a meeting with a director of operations who wanted to contradict the CEO. But we will listen to an independent consultant who has been proven right and has a detailed plan to fix a crisis. What about Richard? I asked. I can't imagine he'd be happy about this arrangement. The temperature in the rooms seemed to drop several degrees. Martin's expression hardened. Richard's future with the company is also on tomorrow's agenda. But regardless of that outcome, your consultancy would report directly to the board, not to the executive team. I took a moment to process what was happening. They were offering me a chance to implement my plan, to potentially save thousands of jobs, and to do so with more authority than I'd had as an employee. But I also knew the politics would be vicious. If Richard remained as CEO, he would do everything in his power to undermine me. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Martin replied, but we'd need your answer by tomorrow afternoon. Things are moving quickly. I spent that night talking it through with my wife. She pointed out the risks, the potential damage to my reputation if things went badly, the stress of working in such a politically charged environment, the fact that as a consultant I'd have no job security once the project ended. But she also reminded me of what was at stake. 3,000 jobs, a company I had helped build for 8 years, and the chance to prove that doing the right thing could sometimes actually work out. By morning, my decision was made. I would take the consulting role, but with conditions. Complete autonomy in implementing the plan, direct access to the board at any time, and a guarantee that any employees who had already been let go would be offered their jobs back with no loss of seniority or benefits. The board meeting lasted 6 hours. I waited at home, checking my phone every few minutes. Finally, at just after 5 p.m., I received a text from Eleanor. Plan approved. Richard resigned. Contract being drawn up with your conditions. We start Monday. Just like that, 90 days after being escorted out of the building with my career in shambles, I was walking back in, not as an employee, but as something more powerful, a consultant with a direct line to the board and a mandate to implement the changes I had fought for. The first day back was surreal. News of my return spread quickly. Some executives who had sat silently during my confrontation with Richard now acted as if they had supported me all along. Others were openly hostile, seeing me as a threat to the new power structures that had formed in my absence. Priya found me in the cafeteria that first day back. She didn't mention our clandestine meeting or the flash drive, but the slight smile she gave me spoke volumes. The finance team is at your disposal, she said formally, for the benefit of anyone listening. We're ready to support the board's new initiative. Implementing the plan was even harder than I had anticipated. The damage done in those few weeks of outsourcing had created a mess that would take months to untangle. Some employees who had been let go had already found new jobs. Critical institutional knowledge had been lost. Client relationships had been damaged, but there were victories too. We managed to rehire over 70% of the laid-off staff. We implemented new operational efficiencies that reduced costs while actually improving our product quality. We rebuilt client trust by being transparent about our mistakes and our new direction. 3 months into my 6-month consulting contract, the stock price had recovered to pre-crisis levels. customer satisfaction ratings were climbing again. And the board had approved my proposal for an employee stock ownership program that would give the staff a direct stake in the company's success. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had more influence as an outside consultant than I ever had as an employee. My firing, which had seemed like the end of my career, had actually given me the freedom and authority to make changes I could never have made from inside the system. There's a lesson there about institutional constraints, about how organizations often limit the very people who could help them most. Sometimes it takes being on the outside to see clearly what needs to change, and to have the leverage to actually change it. Last week, as my consulting contract neared its end, Martin and Eleanor asked me to meet them for dinner. I assumed they wanted to discuss extending my contract, or perhaps transitioning my role as the major changes had been implemented. Instead, they offered me something I hadn't expected: the position of Chief Operating Officer. The board has created a new position, Martin explained. You would report directly to us, not to the new CEO when we hire one. It was a tempting offer. The role would come with real power, significant compensation, and the satisfaction of continuing the work I had started. But as I considered it, I realized something important. I liked being an outsider. I liked the independence that came with consultancy, the ability to speak truth without fear of office politics, the freedom to take on only the projects I believed in. I'm flattered, I told them. But I think I can serve the company better as an independent voice. Eleanor looked disappointed, but not surprised. We thought you might say that, but the offer remains open should you change your mind. As I left the restaurant that night, I felt a deep sense of vindication, not just because I had been proven right about the outsourcing, or because I had managed to save many of the jobs that would have been lost, but because I had stayed true to my principles even when it cost me dearly. And in the end, that integrity had become my greatest asset. I now run my own consulting firm, specializing in helping companies find ethical alternatives to mass layoffs and outsourcing. My experience at Axiom has become a case study I share with clients, a reminder that doing the right thing might cost you in the short term, but integrity has a way of paying dividends in the long run. I still consult for Axiom's board regularly. The company is thriving under a new CEO who understands that treating employees well and maintaining quality aren't just ethical choices. They're good business. And sometimes, when I'm in their building for meetings, I catch the eye of that same security guard who once escorted me out with my cardboard box. He always gives me a nod of respect now. It's a small thing, but it reminds me how dramatically circumstances can change when you stand your ground for what you believe is right. Standing up to power always comes with risks. I lost my job, my income, and nearly my career because I challenged a CEO who was making a destructive decision. But that moment of courage, though it didn't feel like courage at the time, ultimately led to a better outcome than I could have imagined. Not just for me, but for thousands of others whose jobs were saved, and for a company that found a more sustainable path forward. Your story might not be identical to mine, but I know many of you have faced similar crossroads in your careers. Moments when speaking up felt dangerous, but staying silent felt wrong. I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. When have you stood up for what's right in your workplace, and what happened as a result? If you found value in this story, please subscribe to Dismissal Diaries for more real-world accounts of career setbacks that turned into unexpected victories. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video. And remember, sometimes losing your job isn't the end of your story. It might just be the beginning of a better one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.